We're
live.
You did last summer, the college years.
You look kind of like a mob boss.
A little bit.
I mean,
You look like our esteemed guest.
I was at a job interview earlier, and like I feel like if it were at a mattress firm, they would have handed me the collection money.
Speaking of,
What?
well, before we get to sponsor announcement, you have to just first of all introduce us.
Okay. So we're NSP, or the New Symbolization Project Club at Boise State. We are the, let's see, what are we? We've got a nice thing on our Twitter that I just want to read off verbatim, because every time we try to explain this, it is not, hold on, it's not, we don't have much conformity across platforms with how we define ourselves. And I'm going to start that consistency right now.
Right now.
Yes, NSP makes videos and events to foster discourses that are neither capitalist, realist, nor reactionary. So our primary presence is online, where we create a series of videos that attempts to bridge the gap between academia and the general public with more non-reactionary leftist arguments. And we attempt to do that in a way that the alt-right has kind of already done with reaching college-age students.
So we have to say that every time now? That's our uniformity?
No, just that little short description.
Remember, he used conformity, so conform.
Yeah. Submit to my demands. And then we also have a bit of a physical presence where we do some situationist style performance art and stunts on campus to create buzz and draw attention to concepts that we think are important or current events that we think are important. Anybody have anything to add to what NSP is? Because it's a pretty big umbrella.
We read things and we have discussions like
There's another one.
this, which we're doing right now. Athen, what are we talking about today?
Now, before we start, I think it's important to make a phonetic distinction between derive and derive, okay? I've been hearing it pronounced two different ways, and Debord is not trying to talk about the American English word derive, like to draw something from something else. He's talking about derive, which loosely translates to drifting. And if you want to be a huge snob, you can practice your French R and go derive, but that's not entirely necessary to be with us. You can just say derive, but at its core, derive is, like I said, drifting, and it's closely tied to psychogeography, which is another fun key term. There's no phonetic distinction this time. Psychogeography is kind of how your environment affects you mentally and how you affect your environment. It's kind of like the relationship between people and their built phases, psychologically. And so what derive attempts to do is subvert the typical interactions we have with our environment in order to foster a greater understanding of our surroundings and how our relationships kind of socialize us into different interactions. Anybody have anything to add to that full description?
I will say that I think that it does ask us to also conceptualize ourselves as distinct from how we normally conceptualize ourselves. It asks us to put aside things like our work or trade, our personal preferences, and all that. So I think it's kind of a self-othering in a way.
What I think is interesting is how it's not like a practice that you just kind of incorporate into your daily life. It's more of like a thing you go out and do with people. Like it is an event. It kind of reminds me of like a Pokemon Go thing, you know, where everybody gets together and they go explore the lesser aspects of their urban environment or suburban environment, whichever. Usually it's urban. This is very, very traditionally, the studies done for this are very traditionally in large population centers.
It's definitely one of the weird things is because it's, this is coming from a Frenchman, so you're dealing with French cities, which are thousands of years old, which you can kind of wander around, whereas most American cities are, I mean, I don't want to shit on them because I actually kind of like American cities, but
Really?
you kind of have two distinct types of city. You have in the East, they tend to be more centered around large population centers that aren't exactly conformative to things like traffic. And in the West, you then have things that were, either settler towns that were then built into large population centers or that sprung up after the invention of automobiles. So they tend to be more incorporative of cars. And so being able to just walk around is definitely a different experience in America than it would be in Paris or, any place in France. But Paris is kind of what Debord mentions the most in this.
Yeah, and the further you get away from like the 13 original colonies on the East Coast, the further you get away from that European style urban planning, and the more urban sprawl you get. So like here in Boise, we have a tremendous amount of urban sprawl where the population it's kind of this thing where nobody really lives in the downtown area. Everybody lives outside of it and has to commute. And that's very common for a lot of places, commuting to work and back to your house. And that takes up like an hour or two out of your day. And you might as well add it to your 9 to 5 work time, but you don't get paid for it. And so that's something that Derive attempts to combat, is that point A to point B relation you draw between where you live and where you work, and kind of that inherent tunnel vision you get from making that trip every day. In fact, I think that's a pretty good segment when you were talking about cars. I think that's a pretty good segment into the super nice presentation I did a while ago about the psychogeography of urban spaces and how that impacts climate change. And in the article we read, or the little short thing we read, it mentioned environmental sciences a little bit, but they didn't really go into much of what I talked about in this. But I kind of, I was talking about how for the first time, really, we're more separated from our surroundings than we are connected to them. And so we're separated from them by purposeful transportation. So with cars, with the rise in incidence of cars and the decline of public transit systems, which it's kind of resurfacing now, but for a while there it was getting pretty low after the Industrial Revolution. People are traveling with a purpose. They are traveling to a place and back to another place, and they completely disregard the journey. And I was talking about this, how this disconnection from the environment and from the spaces around us kind of socializes us to believe that the natural world isn't as important. And so I think that if people are to care more about environmental issues, then they need to be more in touch with their surroundings. And then the rest of this kind of goes on about things like biophilic design, where humans are, they respond more favorably to shapes that are more, people respond more favorably to natural curving spaces and negatively to straight lines and sharp contours. So we're more attracted to shapes and colors that contain elements found in nature, and they provide a sense of like privacy and security. And then I went on to say that cars are also a huge part of built space. So with that decrease in public transit and that increase in cars that creates that point A to point B relation where you're traveling with a purpose, Not only that, but cars also take up a huge portion of urban spaces because they need places to drive and they need places to park. We need parking lots, parking garages, larger streets to accommodate for traffic. And a lot of Western cities are built in such a way that it's really impossible to walk from one major area to another.
Well, what's the difference between a derive and, he says it's different than going out for a stroll.
Yeah.
Now, let's just say that your stroll is like somewhat aimless. It still wouldn't be a derive?
By Debord's definition, I think that this is what we were talking about. The weird portion of it is that you have to go out with the intent of doing a derive. You know, you have to and it really wants it to be a social experience. So it really wants you to get together a group of people and be like, okay, we're going on a derive now, and we're purposefully trying to, we recognize our relation to our urban space. We recognize the psychogeography of our environment, and we want to do the opposite of that, or we want to do something that completely goes against what we usually do. So I don't think walking aimlessly is quite the same thing, but I think it's probably a component of a derive.
Well, especially, I would say, because walking aimless strolls in capitalism tend to be motivated towards restoration of capitalist spirit. You know, you always, when you hear about people like Thoreau talk about going to the woods and all that, Thoreau is kind of an oddity because that dude just went and lived in the woods. But for a lot of the American romantics, it was more about kind of replenishing themselves by moving away from the city temporarily. Whereas I think the derive does not think of itself as temporary. It doesn't consider itself in a time. So of course it has to end eventually, else you're going to starve or something, or you're going to lose your job. But it doesn't ask you, you don't set out a time in the day to do it. You don't set out a thing. You kind of just decide to do it. You might set a time to meet friends, but it most certainly isn't meant as kind of a restorative action. It's more of a thinking action.
I also think that's to the point where if you're walking aimlessly and you don't think about how your environment is affecting you, you are still being guided. You are still subconsciously being driven to a place or guided to certain places by the design of the environment that surrounds you, because that's the point. It inherently wants to take you in this cycle of like work, home, and then maybe a bit of leisure, if you can make time for that in your day.
Right, and this was my favorite part, because he cites a study that someone did. I forget the name of the people, obviously, but they tracked the behavior patterns of was it a person or a group of people? But they used the example of this one woman.
Oh yeah.
Over the course, a college student, and over the course of a year, it's pretty much like 3 points, right?
What's a triangle?
Triangle.
And it was,
Piano teacher.
it was that work, home, leisure triangle.
Yeah, it was work, home, leisure. Yeah.
It was the school, it was the home, and it was piano lessons.
Also, I mean, I think that, of course, there's a question later on how our daily things are plot out, but I'd almost argue that what you see a lot now is, especially with, say, tech companies, you really want to eliminate that leisure thing. How they probably they're also trying to kind of eliminate the home, though I don't think that's as purposeful, because they just, are in areas that can no longer afford to house their employees, so they just want to build the housing for their own things. Like Google's entertained the idea of building apartments on their campus. And so I'd say that, especially now that there's actually kind of an added importance to the concept of derive, because we're losing even those leisure spaces in favor of, well, now your work, you're because we know that leisure is important for restoring yourself for work, but what if they didn't have to leave the work to restore themselves for the work? I mean, if it were illegal, I'm certain some of these tech companies would just hook them up to steroids and Adderall 24/7, but it's not, so they need another way to stimulate their employees.
A good representation of that is worry-free. I'm sorry to bother you.
I was just gonna,
Yeah.
but no spoilers.
I haven't seen it.
You've all got until the end of the year before
There's
we
a
drop
different-
this.
There's a different stimulant they use in that movie, but
Yeah,
again,
they get to that point, yeah. What were you gonna say, Eddie?
Just want to add something that you said about that people are not aware of their surroundings, because I think there are not meeting places in the communities like I experience in my country, that there are stores, local business. You can walk just 2 blocks and see your friends from your childhood and talk a little bit. So they can walk for 3 blocks, see other houses there, and they can tell you stories about my friend used to live there, used to date this girl. So they know all the houses, how they change during the years, how they add a new storage or windows. But we don't. I haven't seen that here in the United States. It's isolated in these houses, especially. Nobody walks, and that's probably because of they want to separate business and community. They don't want to mix it.
yeah, in some places you'll see there's an actual physical, I forgot exactly where this is, but you can find a great video about it online, about urban sprawl on YouTube. But there's a strip mall, or like a Walmart supercenter or something, some marketplace, and then right behind it there's a housing community, but there's this gigantic wall between the two of them, and you have to drive like 15 minutes to get around the wall so that you can come back and get to that complex, even though they're like this, like right next to each other. And that's done deliberately so that you can't like walk down the street and go to the Walmart. You have to drive all the way around here so that you think it's further than it is.
Well, also, I remember this, I was thinking about this because it came up during the Kavanaugh hearings, was that one of their evidence was that he couldn't have been at the party because like someone mapped out his house to his thing. And they're like, well, he didn't drive at that time and he was living in the suburbs, so he would have walked definitely. And, you know, when you think about it, the suburbs aren't designed for driving or for walking. Sure, they, you know, people jog and everything, but they're very much designed to be driven out of and driven around from. Point, you know, there's no suburbs without garages. And that's because, you know, American life centers around the car because, and I'd argue that there's a deliberate thing around this. It conforms to our individualistic nature and the way we conceptualize of things. I remember there was another article I was reading that said, well, it was really stupidly named. I think it was called, "When I Ride the T, I Lose My Autonomy." And like, it was this Boston dude who now had to drive to work, and he was straight up, and he's like, well, if I drive to work, it's 2 hours. If I take the train, it's 15 minutes, but I fucking hate taking the train because they're poor people, basically. And you know, it's this idea of
Boo, poor people, boo.
and that wasn't exactly what he said. He was like,
Someone might talk to me.
he made this argument that like, well, I can't control where the train is going. It's like, you can't control where your car is going either, buddy.
Yeah, you didn't build the highway.
Yes.
I'm gonna go backwards. I'm gonna go in the oncoming traffic today.
Well, it's even more than that because of course there's, you know, economic relations that force them to go a certain way. But if you're in bumper to bumper traffic, you don't get to control your speed, which was one of his arguments. Like, I can choose to speed or not. It's like, no, you can't. You're in bumper to bumper traffic. You don't get to choose to go 5 miles an hour. And so but I'd say it's because the car represents an individual sphere, and it allows, because there is that possibility. I love my car, but at the same time, I recognize that if there were more public transportation, I'd probably take it more because it's better for the environment. We can go into the individualization and fight against climate change another day, but there's just this idea that the car is better because it gives you individual control, when in reality it doesn't. But it gives enough of an illusion of control, which I think, especially with the board, is important to consider.
Well, when I've been thinking about psychogeography as well, I mean, so part of the whole thing is just like that anywhere you are, if you're going along with the flows of the city or of whatever it is, it's been designed maybe by one interest or maybe by multiple competing interests to get you to go a certain way, to get you to think a certain way. And I think of like I've heard about a lot of money goes into experimenting. Hold on, I'm gonna close that door because it's loud. But a lot of money goes into trying to figure out the ways to manipulate you best to spend the most money in a grocery store, right? And so what goes on the end caps and where and when, and where does the produce get situated from the milk and all of these things. That's a great example of psychogeography. But same thing with the Amazon homepage. There's a person whose entire job is just I think there's more than one person whose entire job is the front page of the Amazon webpage, and just figuring out like how many more people click on this tab when it's situated, from these other tabs. And there's just like the whole thing, right? So that they're mobilizing all of the big data they can to see how can they maximize your flow through their infrastructure, basically.
When I took AP Psych back in high school, we were specifically told about psycho-marketing, and like we were told it was a career path for us if we decided to continue psychology, a very lucrative career path. And the entire idea is joining marketing teams. That Amazon homepage probably has at least one person with a doctorate.
Oh yeah, they're very educated. Yeah.
And like it's not even like the specific sector of marketing. These are actual psychologists who could go and give you stuff that are like entirely designed around figuring out, well, if we what shade of red do we want to use for this packaging? What shade of yellow should the Amazon logo be? Because that changes. Like,
yeah.
You could probably do a study of the change in the yellow and the Amazon logo.
Well, and at any given time, they actually have multiple home pages operating where they have the control, and then they have all of these variants, and they're tracking that, comparing it to the control. So for instance, they'll lump together book and catalog on the same tab just to see how that changes things. I learned about this in my Harvard Business School extension course that I took, which was, I was just like wanting a crash course in business, but like 1/3 of that class was like how Amazon uses big data, basically.
Well, yeah, and this is one thing I point to when I say that Marx, as much as he was right, he also couldn't conceptualize this world. Is that during the Industrial Revolution, it was pretty fucking easy to market stuff. You wanted to market canned beef, you called it canned beef, and you said you'll die if you don't eat this. But nowadays everything is researched, and even small companies, the first thing they'll do is try and get a marketing team once they get profits to an acceptable margin, because you just can't compete. And this is again where economies of scale come in. Is like Amazon can employ 100 psychologists to figure out where to put stuff on a page.
Benjamin Warnell and Michael Downs, what's up, guys? Benjamin asked, what's this about? Well, it's in the description or the title of this video, I think, but the answer is The Derive by Guy Debord, which is an excerpt that we shared in the event for this. Oh, cool. Thanks, Michael. Michael said the classic book by Packard is relevant here. The book is called Hidden Persuaders. Oh, cool. Hey, and by the way, both of you guys, you can join through the Google Hangout right now. You're on the Facebook, but you can join through the Google Hangout. Anyway, let's turn it back over to the discussion though. So, you can find that in the Facebook event if you want to join. But so it's kind of like seeing as everybody is trying to guide our footsteps, our thought and behavior patterns in all of these different ways. This seems like a sort of liberating experiment to try to do a derive. But why do you need more than one person, according to the article? I feel like that's important to always touch on.
Did it say you need more than one person? I thought it said you.
You need groups, I think.
He said the ideal is like 3 to 4.
I thought he said you could do it alone.
I think he said you technically can, but that it's more subjective.
Yeah.
He said that if you go out with some people of the same awareness, which was interesting. How do you know you're going out with the same people, the same awareness, whatever? But anyway, if you go out with some people of about the same awareness, he said that you achieve something that's a bit more objective. So it's like there's that inner subjective.
One can derive alone, but all indications are that the most fruitful numerical arrangement consists of several small groups of 2 to 3 people who have reached the same level of awareness. Since cross-checking these different groups' impressions makes it possible to arrive at more objective conclusions.
I think by awareness he means levels of acid in the system.
I was gonna say,
Yeah, or like a woke score, like a BuzzFeed quiz, and you all take it.
yeah.
Oh my God, we should do BuzzFeed, but for psychology or philosophy. God, I'm an idiot.
No, we should just to join NSP. You have to do a BuzzFeed woke score.
Yeah.
Well, it's like the ASVAB. Your woke score must be a little bit above.
Rank these
Yes.
Netflix exclusives, and we'll tell you your woke score.
And then IQ tests are next. You have to be at least within 5 points of mine, preferably lower.
I don't know if we can get people that low, Dave.
Oh.
So,
Probably
let's
true.
go
I
with-
don't know.
Let's survey the elementary schools in the area.
Actually, though, like thinking about IQ practically, and I'll connect this to the board. Dave actually probably would have a fairly low one because he did not go to public school.
Fair.
I'm sorry, Dave.
That's fine. Yeah.
Because I learned this in my psychology course was that IQ is mainly based more off common social factors that can be used as perceptors of intelligence. Like we got handed like a New Zealand IQ test to prove this, and it was specifically referencing an indigenous language, and it asked us like connect these 3 things, or it was a list of 4 things. Pick the one that's not like the other, and it was deer, crow, snake, and rope. And everyone thought, well, rope because it's not an animal. But the correct answer was actually deer because the language they use, the language doesn't conceptualize things as animals and objects. It conceptualizes them as straight things and like more circular things. Deer are more circular than a crow, a snake, or a rope. And so so if you spoke that language, you'd get it. And so, but we conceptualize IQ because it's a way of differentiating people and saying, well, you're better than the other. And it's better than that, it's psychologically fundamentalist. So you can say, well, no, some people are just smarter than others, rather than intelligence is based off of, class and learning ability.
There's this tie-in.
And what I'm tying in is that it becomes a signifier, so the board. And so actually, another thing I'd say is that as you escape capitalism, you start escaping things like that. And IQ can be very psychologically bad for people who get told they have a low IQ score.
Totally.
Because they don't know how to improve it. They're told they can't improve it. And all of a sudden it's a way to hate yourself. And so go and walk. That's the end of it. No, I said I'd connect it. I didn't say it would be a good.
It seemed very derived.
Yeah, that sentence took a derive.
No, so has anyone ever gone on a derive purposely?
I think sorry.
No, go ahead.
A group of tourists will examine, will do a better analysis of a community because they have the same interests. So, and if you read books about Boise or the United States from a foreigner, they will tell you more things than a native. It's like in my country, there is an American writer who described Machu Picchu and with beautiful words that I never seen how they describe the environment and all the passage and ways. And because he has a different view, because the people who are from there are, it's just probably boring to see every day those mountains. But I think the experiment that we do is with a group of tourists, what they think.
Then also, on the other hand, if you're taking a group of like typical tourists to a touristy place, like a pretty, I'll use, I guess, there were some places in Italy that I went to, like around Mount Vesuvius and like, you know, the ruins. Where it was like you were meant to, you like get off the bus and you stay in this area and it's almost impossible to walk anywhere else. You stay in the area that has all the gift shops and has all the memorabilia, and it's designed to keep you entertained for about like 4 or 5 hours, and then you get back on the bus, go back to your hotel. And there are a lot of places like this, a lot of countries that I've visited, where it's like there are actual fences keeping like the suburbs away from the tourist zones.
Well, you know, most tours you go on now have tour guides, and that's mainly because you take tourists in the country alone and they're going to get their asses killed. And, you know, part of that's because they don't know how to recognize a bad area necessarily, because, you know, you can't go off things like graffiti in a place like Italy because there's just graffiti everywhere. Especially if you're in Pompeii, a lot of dicks on walls. You never know when you're going to get shanked.
Yeah, they're really fond of dicks in Pompeii.
There's like a huge phallic thing with Romans in general. But, you know, so once again, I'd say that capitalism is really trying to.
So I think that there's like an actual, like, I don't know, like they're like a bunch of bros are like getting dressed up to go, I don't know, to a kegger like right next door.
It's almost like pounding a basketball.
And there's a basketball.
Is it just a
This is the
basketball game?
sub. There's not a.
No, this isn't the
Well, what
sub.
do you
This is
mean?
Boise State University.
Sorry, I'm sure that these mics aren't even picking up on it because they're pretty good at kind of staying within the circumference. But still, it's just like it's gotten like ridiculous. I kind of thought I was just going over there and being like, we're recording in here. What?
Should we pull one of them in?
Do you think they're working? Should we interview one of them? Do you want to? Yeah, call one of them over here. Hold on.
Robert, do it.
I'm the biggest one.
Wait, no, but that door looks like it's like cracked open. I'm not even
Yeah.
kidding.
No, that door is totally cracked open. It really is.
I need to put the fear of God into it. Let me get the code.
Oh, what's happening here? Okay, we're like recording. I don't know. That'd be awesome. Thank you.
Thanks,
There was
Ann.
a shirtless person. They're always wearing like weird things. I don't know. There's a guy in a cowboy hat. Like, dude, I don't know.
It is
I don't know.
definitely.
We're just getting moved
Frat boys, am I right?
We're getting moved up for stripper cons.
So I went to put the code on to properly intimidate.
Well, at least the door's closed now. It wasn't closed.
Yeah, we fixed it.
I bet that guy's like, oh, son of a bitch. I said I'd try to keep him quiet. No, he's going to have like a terrible hour. And he's probably going to drop out of the shitty fraternity. He's like,
Good.
these guys never shut up. I just realized how loud they are.
Yeah, good for him.
Yeah, he'll probably join our club.
I want to go back to Eddie, what you were saying about tourists and how like is that considered a derive? But if you think about it, when like tourists, they want to go out and they want to look at the area. But if you're just you're looking at it through your phone, and if all you're doing is taking pictures, are you really appreciating the terrain and what's around you?
Google Maps, good food, and then you go to the place that it shows you.
Okay, legit,
Yeah.
I almost went to a Chinese food restaurant while in Italy just to find out, because it specifically said American Chinese food, and I was just so curious what Italian American Chinese food was.
Yeah, so it's interesting to think about the way that technology and our addiction to it plays into how we are able to go out on these derives and kind of completely detach ourselves. Can we listen to music while we're out on a derive? Does that change anything? Like, can we take pictures? How does that play
We have
into
our
it?
phone in any capacity.
Yeah.
I don't think Debord's gonna like resurrect himself
I
and
mean,
tell us we're doing it wrong.
Obviously, but it's just something
Well,
to think about.
Because what's
I just
interesting
feel
about it
it's
is that it's
bullshit.
supposed to be some sort of state of mind that you can get into with other people. So I wonder if it would be facilitated better perhaps by music.
It would need to be some sort of communal music. Though.
There's got to be some.
Like in my backpack, have the Bluetooth boombox.
No, it's got to be like a full-on like '80s boombox, like
Yeah.
you gotta do
Okay.
it right.
Okay, yeah,
Otherwise,
that's the only way to do it.
yeah.
Debord wasn't, alive for those things to be invented, but he'd agree.
Yeah.
Everyone's got to be wearing Jinko jeans and like raving to it. But
So tying it back to tourism, I would definitely say that my understanding, and okay, I'm gonna use simple dichotomies, right, pedagogically here. There's this difference between tourism and traveling, and that when you are trying not to be the filthy American tourist, you're trying to be a traveler, right? Which has a lot to do with trying to learn the local culture. You don't get too caught up with your phone taking pictures of the supposed sites that you want to see. You're also looking for the holes in the wall places. Like you're trying to get away from the other Americans, and you're trying to like get away from just like they're kind of there's like entire like spots that are kind of cordoned off for you, and you're looking for the other ones, right? So for me in Thailand, I was looking for temples that weren't like spots people went to just to take pictures, right? Because I was studying Thai Buddhism there. But I was in Chiang Mai for a month, and for me, my main goal was to get a scooter first thing, and I rented that for like over 3 weeks, and I spent the good amount of that just riding around, right? And and getting lost purposefully, and then eventually finding my way back around. So and over time, like I got a really good sense for the city, but I found all sorts of crazy cool stuff I wouldn't have otherwise. And I couldn't even really use Google Maps anyway. Just the way that service worked out, and like I could find myself on a map, but it ended up being more useful just to have a couple of like landmarks and figure out where my apartment was from like those big landmarks, and then I just do everything vis-a-vis those. And so yeah, and you know what? I did end up in some sketchy neighborhoods. But thankfully, when I was in the sketchiest neighborhood and there were some people following us, I was with a local person who's a friend there named Nick. And I don't know. There was a part where he was like, keep on walking, keep on walking. They said that they're going to mug us. And I was just like, oh shit. But we were both trashed because we had gone to the beer. Like there's an all you can drink like beer buffet anyway for like $5. It's crazy. But point is, I felt like there were times when I sort of did a derive on that trip, and but then there were other times when it's like, okay, if you want to see elephants, you don't want to go do it. Like there is no proper way to go see elephants, and the closest you can get to a proper way to go see elephants that aren't being madly exploited is at like a haven where they rescue elephants too, and then they're just kind of given like 100 acres to like wander around and blah blah blah. Because most elephants are being exploited by the tourist industry. So, but you kind of have to pick your battles. And so like that was like one where I was like, okay, the tourist option is the most ethical in this case. Because the other options are more like you can ride them. Those ones are the ones you don't want to do.
Go ahead.
You take a taxi.
The red trucks. They have these red truck taxi events.
I think he talks about the taxi run in the text.
Does it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you go out in a taxi and go around, if you are probably consciously see the places, or I forgot that part.
I think I remember something about this.
That's why I asked you about if you take the.
But the use of taxis, for example, can provide a clear enough dividing line. If in the course of a derive one takes a taxi, either to get to a specific destination or simply to move, say, 20 minutes to the west, one is concerned primarily with a personal trip outside one's usual surroundings. If, on the other hand, one sticks to the direct exploration of a particular terrain, one is concentrating primarily on research for a psychogeographical urbanism. And this is on the difference between, like a difference in goals between like studying a terrain or emotionally disorienting yourself. And so, like in your case, you were trying to emotionally disorient yourself.
But I was also kind of doing recon, just
Yeah.
getting my lay of the land.
So,
So
you
it was a
started with
mixture.
emotionally disorienting yourself, and eventually you got to a point where you could study the terrain because you had enough of an understanding of it.
What I would say is that I'm not quite certain that derives can be done accidentally. Like I think that Debord definitely applies. There must be purpose. One must be setting out to do it, which I think is one of the ways that it differs from a just random stroll.
So at the time, I was calling it wandering because I didn't have the language of a derive. But I was thinking wandering's not the same thing as like walking, and that's how I was thinking about it. It gets close, but it's still different. I think there's some overlap.
Yeah, definitely. And you know, I think it's also questionable, you know, if one really could perform a derive in a foreign land without spending enough time there to acclimate themselves to it. Because you could definitely notice things, but also you're going to miss cultural signifiers. And if you never grew up in that place, you might never notice cultural signifiers. Like, you know, growing up in Boise, I know how important, even though I don't talk about trees that often, I know how important trees are to Boise. Boise takes a lot of pride in trees. And that was definitely something I noticed when I was giving Peter Coffin and Adam a ride, was that like in downtown, they'd never noticed really why it was called the City of Trees, because downtown is becoming more and more urbanized with less and less giant trees. But once we started getting out, you know, more into like the regular Boise area, suddenly they're going, holy shit, it's green. Well, you know, fall colors, but still kind of green because climate change is going to kill us all. But, you know, so cultural signifiers, I think, are also important to a derive because they help you understand the psychological thing. And it's just like if you're talking to your psychoanalyst in a different language, it's going to be a really weird thing.
Like a tourist would usually never go to the north end because they're in that downtown sphere. You come here for, usually most people come here for business. They stay in a hotel downtown, and then they go to the convention center or wherever, the campus or wherever the business that they have to attend to is. They do it, they get recommendations, they eat downtown, and then they go back to their hotel. And like you said, there aren't many trees in downtown. It's more in the north end, but the north end is like a 5-minute walk from the center of downtown. So you could see like this incredibly dense tree-lined streets and stuff if you were to just go a little bit more north. But that just doesn't happen because it's not supposed to happen. You're not supposed to be because the north end is purely like residential area.
I think what would make sense to do is to like go around with some wrap down thoughts, call it a day because we've got the bro party next door. And this is
I'm just kind of confused on what could constitute a derive still. Because, okay, are we really going to get together a group of people and be like, let's go find parts of our environment that we usually don't explore, and let's go against our what we've been conditioned to, our psychogeography.
And then also, like, why is it not as meaningful if you go alone? Because thinking about it myself, I feel like if there were other people there distracting me, I wouldn't get as much from the environment as opposed to me just going and like being able to take it all in kind of in silence.
I think it's kind of the same reason we do this as a group, just so you can kind of bounce ideas off of each other. But
Well, especially because
Yeah, no, yeah.
I think Debord probably was not going around with like his drinking buddies. Well, they were probably his drinking buddies, but it wasn't like, oh, here's 3 guys I met at the bar, let's go wander Paris. It was more probably, here's 3 other sociology professors who I really like and am friends with. Let's go wander around Paris and think about the psychogeographical thing.
with no other drive, it just seems like pretty inherently dorky, though.
I think it is very dorky. I think that's the idea. Like, Debord's a dork. Like every philosopher is a dork.
I mean, he's also a sociology, right? So, wait, did I say a sociology?
Yeah.
A
Yeah.
sociologist.
He's
Sorry.
exactly one sociologist.
That'll be the
He's-
title of this video.
He is a sociology, and it seems like a good sociological or anthropological sort of experiment, and that merely having the concept will probably result in thoughtful people doing it occasionally. And so, and he says that there's like this overlap, there's this huge overlap between the emotional disassociation and the territorial sort of exploration, where you're kind of mapping, but it's not exactly an either or. And I think that because it is such a kind of flexible concept, that the question shouldn't be like, what is a derive, but more just like, what are ways that we would want to derive, right? So because I think we all do it in some respect. And so it's like, what are ways of doing it more purposefully? And the purposefulness is probably like the bigger part. So I for instance, would, now that I've read that, want to be able, I will probably in the next couple weeks just be like, hey, let's derive. And like, one of the things that's more interesting about the way they're doing it is that's not like a hike, how we do a hike where we just go on a hike, but it's like, he said that the average time is like you wake up and you go and you do it all day and then you come back. That's it's a lot of commitment. It's pretty intense.
Sounds like something you should probably take psychedelics before.
And and the thing is psychedelics really are a sort of instigation of a kind of derive, and your mind has all sorts of ruts that it's in, and all sorts of new connections are going to get formed. You're going to get thrown out of all sorts of ruts the moment you do anything hallucinogenic. But I also wanted to like propose that I was thinking like, what would it look like to do it online, right? Because we all have our online habits, and that in general, most people are using YouTube, Facebook, and Google, and I'm guilty as charged. I use those 3 things like the most, but it's like 90% of online usage in the United States is Facebook, I think. It's something ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. And so what would a derive look like online, And stumbleupon.com was really cool back in the day. I don't even know if it's still around, but like you do select by interest, but I'm sure you could select like a random account and you could just go stumbling and just see all sorts of new stuff that way. But then I was thinking, but a derive is different if you're supposed to try to do it with other people as well. Because right now, think about your entire internet experience is kind of being curated towards your identity and your habits. And so all the algorithms are trying to give you certain things in a certain slant. So if you went into it, say on an anonymous or whatever browser, incognito browser, and then you were, say, stumbling, but you were doing it with some friends, it'd be interesting. I've ended up doing stuff like that with people before. Or have you ever like scrolled Facebook with other people and sat there commentating on what you see together? It's really a different experience.
But you're still being fed what the algorithm wants you to. So
Yeah,
I feel like to really do a derive online, you have to consciously try to break the algorithm on every site you're on. You have to try to do behavior that it does not want you to do, or that it's not trying to guide you towards.
I honestly don't know if a derive would be possible online. Because a derive, at least I think, in part requires you to set aside your personal interests, your motivations, and all that. But the online is constructed around those things.
I'll give you an example. All right. My friends and I, we used to go to the YouTube search. We would filter it so that it was most recent upload date and only in the past hour. So you would see videos uploaded like seconds ago or minutes ago.
Oh,
And we
cool.
would type in Minecraft.
Oh dear
And
God.
we would only get like 12-year-olds filming like their TV screen, you know, at like a sleepover with their other middle school friends, you know, like playing Minecraft on their mom's iPad. And it was hilarious. And we would comment on it commentate it for hours.
Does that like count as a derive? That
Does
just
it?
kind of sounds like
That's my question. Or are we
Yeah.
just dickheads?
honestly, that just kind of sounds like psychotic. I don't know if I could subject myself to 12-year-old Minecraft. I mean, I think that the online is, I don't think we should use the ontological concepts of this world for the internet. You know, we can base our ideas off of it. We can base things like the simulacrum off of it on the online, but online is entirely simulated. So I think we need new words for it. So I think that we can't use something, or at least new concepts, maybe not entirely new words. But so something like a derive, I think, is an intensely personal, intensely physical, intensely in the real world, to use a terrible term, concept. Whereas online, it's an entirely different landscape that has to be conceived of entirely differently.
I think you can derive online.
What do you think?
I don't. I just don't.
do you
It
think
seems
my
like you think it's a
example-
really high bar for some reason. Is it just the French? It's just a French word, so it's this high bar. What in the reading gave you the sense that it's like this high bar?
Well, I'm not saying it's a high bar, but I think it requires a physicality that does not exist online. I think there's something to be said for the symbolic act of moving around.
There is time and there is space online, and
But
that
that's
time
an
and that
entirely
space,
different time and space.
and that time and that space is very similar to the time and space of a city, insofar as it is set up by people who want to guide your patterns of behavior.
Okay, but I still think there's an entirely different thing in that, you know, one, the online primarily exists for us during leisure time, unless you have a job specifically working with it. But also the fact that the online itself is, you know, like in theory, to do a derive, you'd also have to go on the dark web.
I don't know. I think that when Bert, for instance, had first of all, but why? Why does it have to be such a break? That's like saying that you have to be transplanted into a different country to do a derive.
Well, no, but
Like
In the
I would be
article,
doing a
Debord
derive if
argues-
he said that you can do a derive just by spending enough time at a very interesting building. So it doesn't have to be a completely
In
different
this
city or
reading,
something.
it basically argues that you have to be a delinquent to derive. Like all of the things mentioned are like break into, like trespass into abandoned buildings, or like hitchhike around the city when there's chaos going on just to amplify the chaos, or like what were some of the other good ones? There were some hilarious things in here.
But he did have like just spending time by a building that's interesting, right?
Yeah.
And so I would say like that a derive could be like, here's your normal, like let's just say you have your normal triangle. That a derive could be a derive insofar as you're breaking from that triangle and you're bringing on something new. So it could be just going to websites that you would never go to. It could be ones that you have no reference for, but it could also be like what Bert was talking about with this app that he got for navigating Facebook, where it doesn't, it basically breaks past all the Facebook algorithms and it just shows you all of your friends in order that they've been posting stuff. Like there was a time when Facebook was like that just naturally, but now there's an app where you can do that. That's kind of a derive. And he was talking about how he's seen all these posts from all these people he'd forgotten about and all this stuff.
But that's still all simulated, because what I post on Facebook is not what I might encounter in the real world. Once again, real being a very relative, very lack of a better word concept.
But do we have to start to consider the internet real?
I think there's, once again, it gets complicated because this is a Bedrillian question of what is real. But I think the internet is simulated different than the real world is simulated, because the real world and the internet are fundamentally different.
But can the internet be real in its own right?
In its own right, of course. But I think that all reality in the internet is injected into it, whereas in the other world, all simulation is injected into it, creating a hyperreal. There's hyperreality in both, but the hyperreality is different in both.
So could we just do a slightly different derive in virtual space and have it have different significance, but still be the same concept?
But as I understand Debord, the point of the derive is to break away from the simulated.
I think it's more to break away from the conditioned and from the expected than the real.
So maybe I'm thinking of it
because I think it's just because they didn't conceptualize something like the internet then, and so.
Well, that's the other thing. It's really hard to say by these terms what could be considered a derive online, because the internet is so vastly different than Paris in the 1950s.
I think there is no authentic online derive, because the internet is giving you the things you want. You see Facebook, you just receiving information from your friends, or it's just you're not looking for this information. It's just in your phone. And the same with Amazon. Is the things they're giving you, the shoes that you want, what you look before, and so you are just in one. He says that you shouldn't be influenced. You have to walk, by yourself and wondering. Shouldn't be no influence. So the internet is influencing you because they have all your information, because you type all your, day of birth or the things you like.
But what if you were to go to websites that aren't these ones that you visit usually or aren't as big? What if you went to something that's just like a basic HTML site that has no algorithm trying to game you, and you were to just follow information from there?
But I also, so there's that, but then I also just would want to, and so this isn't particular to the online discussion. This is getting back to just to derive in general. I think part of the point of doing it with other people also is it's supposed to kind of, you're not trying to space out while you're walking. You're trying to be like remain cognizant of the ways you're being manipulated by the geography. And so it's not that you're not being manipulated, it's that you are putting yourself into this sort of incredulous space where you're
woke.
Yeah, you're getting super, you're woke.
You just walk around woke.
Are you trying to get broke, woke, or spoke?
Broke, woke, or spoke?
Yeah.
What about toked?
What is spoke?
No, it's bespoke. Like any socialist meme isn't like broke, woke. It's broke, which is like your typical reactionary thing. Woke, which is like the typical liberal reaction, and then bespoke, which is like the socialist reaction.
Is this a Chapo thing?
This is not a Chapo thing. Chapo hates memes. That's Chapo's official stance, well, except for Felix.
Really? Oh.
Matt threatened to kill everyone when they started saying God's plan to him.
Wow, I don't blame Matt.
God's plan.
All right. Close thoughts.
I was gonna do this whole thing where I read some passages from this album that's about psychogeography, or at least I view it that way, and then have you guys analyze whether or to what extent this speaks to derive. But I feel like that's a whole other thing. So I'm just gonna say that and not do anything with it.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's your call.
Does anyone else have anything?
I was like bummed out that we're not doing that.
I mean, I like the board. That's all I can say. I like the board.
This is really interesting.
He influenced Baudrillard a lot. Like Baudrillard was like just your regular sociologist. He's like, oh, I'm going to study Paris and like how its city was built. He reads Debord and he's like, nah, fuck that shit. I'm going to like talk about like the ways in which we're simulated in our society.
Wasn't Debord on his committee?
I think Debord was on this committee. That's a better question for Mikey.
Yeah. No, it blew my mind when I looked up Baudrillard on Wiki. Like Wikipedia, it just says that it's Barth, Debord, and then Lafayette, or however you say, the Critique of Everyday Life guy. Gosh, that is a power committee.
I mean, like, part of me feels bad for American academia because it's never going to be as great as like, because like German academia during like the idealist portion was like amazing. Like you walk into an academy and it's just like, oh, there's Hegel, there's Schopenhauer. Oh shit, their classes are at the same time. Wonder why that is. You know, you walk into a French, you know, you go to Paris and you go to a bar and suddenly, you know, Sartre's in the corner, you know, getting drunk with his girlfriend. Ernest Hemingway starting a fight he doesn't want to finish.
This is just what you get when you have like a real like hardcore aristocracy. You only have a few people
Well, we're so
at the
dispersed.
top.
We're so dispersed also.
It was so dispersed.
No, we're so dispersed.
Oh,
you
we
know,
are.
in France there are like, what, like 10 major like academies for philosophy. And, you know, like the biggest one is in Paris because it's the population center. But in, you know, America, there's what, 200 schools that are like considered in like the top. There's like a top 200 philosophy schools, and any one of them is like considered like a good place to go. So, you know, all of a sudden it becomes just so much harder to get a group of people together for philosophy and to create a kind of community.
US is too fucking big.
All right, do it, Athen.
Do what? What am I doing?
The thing.
Oh, you want me to? All
Do
right.
it.
We've got this is from The Good Thing. All right, this is off of More Songs About Buildings and Food by Talking Heads, if you want to listen. A straight line exists between me and the good thing. I have found the line, and its direction is known to me. Absolute trust keeps me going in the right direction. Any intrusion is met with a heart full of the good thing. Watch me work, watch me work, watch me work, watch me work.
Yeah, I think that's about psychogeography.
Psychogeography.
I'm tired. I'm sorry.
Yeah, psychogeometry could be cool too.
That's next week's discussion. Join us for that.
And psycho jazz.
I was just gonna say something about when he mentioned progress. Progress means breaking through fields where chance holds sway by creating new conditions more favorable to our purposes. I was thinking about maybe is this a progress of human thought or is just a desire of humans? Because colonists, the settlers have the desire to go past the Atlantic Ocean and see new things and for different purposes, but they have this consequence, you know, in order to survive, they have to exterminate other humans. So it's not a real progress, or just progress for your own desires, but not
Progress for who?
The real question was Columbus on a derive.
No. He was on a mission.
Okay, like I feel like he was dumb enough. He was technically on a derive. Because that boy just like did not get how big the world was.
He said he was trying to do it differently. He was like, look, we do it this way, I'm gonna do it the other way.
It's also because like he just thought he was smarter than everyone else. And so
It's
like
been
when
real.
he did his math about the circumference of the earth, he's like, Oh, no, it's actually much smaller than everyone says it is.
Say your last words.
You gonna go?
I feel like I understand more of like the actual article, and I understand more of what Debord was saying, but I feel like I understand a derive less. I feel like I'm more confused now about what a derive is, which I don't think is a bad thing though. I just have a lot to think about and what constitutes a derive. Yeah, that's my closing remark.
Sick. Now, when I go back and review it, it'll probably all seem so much more clear. All right. Goodbye, internet.
Bye.
No, we found out the mic was